The mansion was quiet when Irene and Solomon arrived. The large front doors opened, and 2 security men stepped aside as they walked in. Solomon said nothing. He had been silent since they left the wedding. His eyes moved around the mansion. Everything looked expensive. The marble floor, the huge staircase, the paintings on the walls, the expensive furniture. This was Irene's world, a world Solomon had never imagined he would enter as her husband. My name is Patience. Welcome to Etanalog. Irene walked ahead of him, holding the bottom of her wedding dress slightly above the floor. She looked happy, almost too happy. Solomon followed her slowly. Then Irene stopped. She turned around. Come here. Solomon looked at her. What? I said come here. He walked closer. Irene waited until he was standing directly in front of her. Then, without warning, she placed both hands on his chest and pushed him backward. Solomon hit the wall. His eyes widened. Irene! She placed one hand firmly against his chest and leaned closer. The smile was still on her face. You remember this house? She asked. Solomon swallowed. No. Of course you don't. She looked around the mansion. Everything here belongs to me. Solomon stared at her. I know. No, Irene said quietly. You don't. She stepped closer. You know I am rich. You know I own this house. You know I have people working for me. Her smile disappeared. But you still don't understand what that means for you. Solomon slowly lowered his eyes. Irene, we just got married. I know. So why are you doing this? Irene stared at him for a few seconds. Then she laughed softly. Why? She moved away from him. Solomon, did you really think I married you because I wanted a husband? He looked at her. She walked toward a nearby table and picked up a glass of water. You should be grateful. Grateful. Yes. She took a sip. You are still alive. You are standing in a beautiful house. You are wearing an expensive suit. And you have just married a billionaire. Solomon gave a bitter laugh. Then why does this feel like a prison? Irene looked at him. Because it is. The smile returned to her face. Solomon's expression changed. Irene. She raised one finger. Don't. He stopped talking. I don't want excuses tonight. She placed the glass down. I have heard enough excuses from you. Solomon looked away. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Irene walked toward him again. This time, she stopped just a few steps away. You used to tell me that I was too soft. Solomon looked at her. You said I trusted people too easily. You said I loved too much. Her voice became quieter. And you were right. Solomon's face tightened. Irene, I know I hurt you. She laughed. Do you? Yes. You don't. He looked at her. You think saying sorry can change what happened? No. You think I forgot? No. You think because we are married now, everything between us suddenly disappears? Solomon shook his head. I don't. Irene stared at him. For a moment, something softer appeared in her eyes. Pain. Then it disappeared. Good. She turned away. Your room is upstairs. Solomon looked surprised. My room. Yes. Your room. Irene smiled. Did you think you were going to sleep beside me? He said nothing. She pointed toward the staircase. Go upstairs. Solomon didn't move. Irene. She turned. Go. There was something in her voice that made him obey. Solomon walked toward the staircase. He took one step, then another. Irene watched him from below. Solomon. He stopped. She looked at him. Tomorrow morning, you will wake up at 6. He frowned. Why? Because I said so. He stared at her. You can't control everything I do. Irene smiled. Really? She took out her phone. She pressed a button. Immediately, one of the security men appeared at the entrance of the room. Irene didn't even look at him. Make sure Solomon is awake at 6. Yes, ma'am. Solomon looked at the security man. Then he looked back at Irene. She smiled sweetly. Good night, husband. And she walked away. Solomon remained on the staircase, watching her disappear down the hallway. He had known Irene for years. He had loved her. He had hurt her. He had walked away from her. But as he stood inside her mansion that night, he finally understood something. The woman he once thought he could control had become the woman who controlled everything. At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, someone knocked on Solomon's door. "Wake up!" Solomon opened his eyes. He looked at the clock. 6 a.m. He pulled the blanket over his head. Maybe the man would leave. 3 seconds later, the door opened. "Wake up!" Solomon sat up immediately. Ezekiel stood at the door. He was a large, intimidating man who rarely smiled. He had been working for Irene for years, and there was something about him that made people think twice before arguing with him. Solomon looked at him. "I'm awake." "Good." Ezekiel pointed toward the hallway. "Madam is waiting." Solomon quickly got out of bed. He had never been afraid of security guards before. But Ezekiel was different. By the time Solomon reached the dining room, Irene was already sitting at the table. She was wearing a simple morning dress. In front of her was a plate of food. She looked at Solomon and smiled. "Good morning, husband." "Good morning." "Sit down." Solomon sat. Irene pointed at the food. "I cooked that for you." Solomon looked at the plate. "You cooked?" "Yes." He became even more nervous. Irene noticed. "What?" "Nothing." "Eat." Solomon picked up a spoon. He took one bite. He stopped. Irene watched him carefully. "How is it?" Solomon looked at the food, then at Irene, then at Ezekiel, who was standing behind him. It is good." Irene smiled. "Really?" "Yes." She looked at Ezekiel. "Ezekiel." "Yes, ma'am." "He's lying." Solomon nearly dropped a spoon. Irene laughed softly. "I knew it." She took his plate. "You don't like it." "I'm sorry." "You should be." She stood up. "Do you know why I cooked this?" Solomon shook his head. "Because I wanted to see if you would tell me the truth." She placed the plate back in front of him. "You failed." Solomon looked at Ezekiel. Ezekiel looked back at him. "Eat." Solomon picked up a spoon again. He ate. Irene sat across from him watching. After breakfast, she gave him his first task. He was going to wash her clothes. At first, Solomon thought she was joking. She wasn't. A few minutes later, he was standing in the laundry room with a basket of clothes. He stared at it. "This is ridiculous." From behind him came a deep voice. "Did you say something?" Solomon turned around. Ezekiel was standing at the door. "No." "Good." Solomon started washing. He had never done this much laundry in his life. And it got worse when Irene brought him another basket. "My clothes." Solomon stared at her. "All of them?" "Yes." She walked away. Then she stopped. "Oh, and don't forget the delicate ones." Solomon looked down at the clothes in his hands. His life had changed very quickly. A few months ago, he had owned a successful business. People respected him. People listened when he spoke. Now he was standing in a laundry room washing his wife's clothes. And the woman he had once loved was somewhere in the mansion, deciding what he would do next. Later that morning, Irene called him. "Solomon!" He hurried downstairs. "Yes!" "Come here." He walked toward her. She was sitting comfortably on the sofa. "Sit." He sat. "Lie down." Solomon stared at her. "What?" "You heard me." He slowly lay down. Irene placed her feet in front of him. "Clean them." Solomon's face changed. "Irene." She looked at him. "Do you want Ezekiel?" Solomon immediately lowered his head. "No." "Then clean them." He obeyed. Irene watched him quietly. There was no happiness on her face. No excitement. Only satisfaction. She had once begged Solomon to listen to her. Now she didn't have to ask twice. By afternoon, Solomon was in the kitchen. He had been ordered to cook lunch. The problem was simple. Solomon couldn't cook. He tried anyway. When Irene finally tasted the food, she became silent. Solomon stood in front of her. "Is it okay?" Irene looked at him. Then she looked at Ezekiel. "Ezekiel." "Yes, ma'am." "Please." Solomon's eyes widened. Wait. "Irene, I can fix it." Ezekiel stepped forward. Solomon immediately dropped the spoon. "I'll cook again." Irene shook her head. "Too late." "Ezekiel, please." Ezekiel took Solomon away. A short while later, Solomon returned. He was much quieter. Irene pointed toward the kitchen. "Try again." Solomon went back inside. This time, he cooked very carefully. When he finally served the food, Irene tasted it. She nodded. "Better." Solomon sighed with relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me." She continued eating. "You still have dinner." Solomon's face fell. Irene continued eating as if nothing had happened. That evening, Solomon finally returned to his room. He sat on the edge of the bed. His body was tired. His pride was even more tired. There was a knock on the door. He looked up. Irene entered. She closed the door behind her. Solomon stared at her. "What do you want?" Irene walked closer. "You know what I want." Solomon looked away. There were some nights when Irene came to his room and expected him to be available to her. He had learned that refusing her would only create another problem. So he stayed silent. The mansion became quiet, and another night passed. The next morning, Solomon woke up at exactly 6 o'clock. He didn't wait for Ezekiel this time. He got out of bed himself. He washed his face. He dressed. And he walked downstairs. Irene was already there. She looked at him and smiled. "You're learning." Solomon said nothing. She picked up her cup of tea. "Good." Then she handed him a list. "These are today's tasks." Solomon looked at the paper. There were 11 things written on it. He stared at the list. 11. Yes. I did everything yesterday. And today is another day. He looked at her. "Irene, how long is this going to continue?" She smiled. "As long as I want." Solomon lowered his eyes. Irene took another sip of tea. 4 years. Solomon had believed that losing his money would be the worst thing that could happen to him. He was wrong. Money could be replaced. A business could be rebuilt. But every morning inside Irene's mansion, something else was disappearing. His pride, and Irene was making sure he felt every moment of it. Solomon came home before 6 that evening. He stopped outside the mansion and looked at his watch. 5:43 p.m. He had spent the entire day working at Irene's company. It was still his business experience that kept him useful there. He understood numbers, customers, and business decisions. But there was one problem. It was no longer his company. It belonged to Irene. And Solomon worked there because Irene allowed him to. He entered the mansion quietly. He was hoping Irene would not notice the time. She noticed. Irene was sitting in the living room when he walked in. She looked at the clock. Then she looked at him. "You are home." Solomon stopped. "Yes." "What time is it?" He looked at his watch. 5:43. Irene smiled. "Interesting." Solomon knew that smile. "Irene, there was a problem at the office. I didn't ask why." She picked up her phone. "Ezekiel." Solomon's face changed immediately. "Irene, please." She didn't answer him. "Ezekiel." A few seconds later, Ezekiel appeared. Solomon stepped backward. "I can explain." Irene looked at him. "Go with him." Solomon shook his head. "Irene, please. I worked all day." Ezekiel walked toward him. Solomon looked at Irene one last time. She simply pointed toward the hallway. "Go." Ezekiel took Solomon away. The door closed. A few moments later, Solomon's voice could be heard from the room. "Irene." She remained on the sofa. Then his voice became louder. "Please." Irene closed her eyes. She heard him scream again. And suddenly, the mansion disappeared from her mind. She was back in university. Years earlier. Before the mansion. Before the money. Before the revenge. Before Solomon became her husband. Irene was sitting beside Solomon on a university bench. She was smiling. Solomon was holding her hand. They were young and deeply in love. One day, Irene said, "I want children." Solomon smiled. "Of course." "How many?" "Maybe 3. Irene laughed. 3. "Yes." She rested her head on his shoulder. "I would like that." But when Irene became pregnant, everything changed. Solomon was not ready. He was afraid. "Irene, we can't do this now." "But I want the baby." "I know. I'm ready." "I am not." She looked at him. "Then what do you want me to do?" Solomon held her hands. "Please." Irene knew what he was asking. She cried, but she loved him. So she agreed. Later, it happened again. And again. Each time, Solomon promised her that one day they would have their family. Just not now. Irene believed him. She kept sacrificing what she wanted, and because she loved him. Then came the day when everything changed. The doctors told Irene that she would not be able to give birth again. She sat quietly. She could barely hear the rest of the conversation. She had wanted to be a mother. She had imagined holding her own child. And now she could not. Solomon knew. He knew it had happened because of everything they had gone through. But instead of staying beside her, he made another selfish decision. He left, not because he stopped loving her. He still loved her, but he could not accept marrying a woman who could no longer give him children. Irene never forgot that. She never forgot the pain. She never forgot his promises. And she never forgot that she had sacrificed everything because she loved him. Ah! Solomon's scream brought Irene back to the present. She looked toward the hallway. Her face was expressionless. A few minutes later, Ezekiel came out. Solomon followed behind him. His shirt was slightly untidy. There were visible marks on his body. He looked exhausted. Ezekiel walked away. Solomon stood in front of Irene. He was breathing heavily. Irene looked at him for a long moment. "Come here." Solomon slowly walked closer. She looked at his face, then at the marks on his body. She knew what she had done, and for a brief moment, something painful appeared in her eyes. She still loved him. That was the part she hated most. Because even after everything he had done to her, seeing him hurt still affected her. But she pushed the feeling away. "Give me a peck." Solomon stared at her. "What?" "A peck." He didn't move. Irene raised an eyebrow. Solomon slowly leaned forward and gave her a brief kiss on the cheek. She smiled. "Good." Solomon stepped back. Irene looked at him. "Now go and rest." He turned around. "Solomon." He stopped. "I don't want you coming home late again." He nodded. "Yes, Irene." He walked away. Irene remained on the sofa. Her smile disappeared. She looked down at her hands. For all her money, all her power, and everything she had done to Solomon, there was one thing she still could not control: her feelings for him. Solomon lay awake in his room that night. He could not sleep. He stared at the ceiling while his mind went through everything that had happened since he married Irene. The mansion, the rules, the work, the punishments, Ezekiel, the way Irene could change his entire day with one sentence. He turned to the other side. He was tired, not just physically. He was tired of being controlled. He was tired of being treated like he had no choice. He wanted a divorce. Solomon sat up. That's it. He needed to leave. He needed his freedom back. He reached for his phone and opened his contacts. He thought about calling a lawyer, but then he stopped. A lawyer would ask questions. Questions about the marriage. Questions about Irene. Questions about why he had agreed to it. And eventually, someone would ask the question Solomon had been avoiding. Why couldn't he simply leave? Solomon dropped the phone on the bed. He already knew the answer. It was the reason he had agreed to marry Irene in the first place. The crime. Years ago, Solomon had been involved in something serious. The details had never been spoken about openly, but Irene had evidence. Real evidence. Other people involved had already been caught. They were serving life sentences. If Irene gave the evidence to the authorities, Solomon knew exactly what could happen to him. That was how Irene had brought him into the marriage. She had given him a choice: marry her, or face the consequences of his past. Solomon closed his eyes. "I can't leave." He whispered the words to himself. Even if he found a lawyer, what would happen? Even if he filed for divorce, Irene could destroy him. Even if he ran away, she had enough power to find him. He was trapped, and now he understood something even worse. Irene had never needed that secret to control his daily life. She didn't need it to make him wash her clothes. She didn't need it to make him work for her. She didn't need it to make him obey her. She simply had power, money, people, influence, and a mansion where almost everyone answered to her. The crime had only been the reason he could not walk away. Everything else was Irene's choice. Solomon got out of bed and walked to the window. Outside, the mansion grounds were completely quiet. He could see 2 security men near the gate. One of them was Ezekiel. Solomon stared at him. Then he looked back into his room. He remembered his old life, his business, his friends, his university days, and Irene. He remembered the girl who used to laugh at his terrible jokes, the girl who wanted children, the girl who trusted him, the girl who had sacrificed what she wanted because she loved him. He remembered leaving her. He remembered telling himself that he had no choice. But now he knew better. He had always made choices, and most of them had been selfish. Solomon sat on the edge of the bed. A tear rolled down his face. "I ruined her life." He said it quietly. Then he shook his head. "No." He wiped his face. "I ruined both of our lives." There was a knock on the door. Solomon quickly looked up. The door opened. Irene stood there. She was still wearing the same calm smile. "You're awake." Solomon looked at her. "Yes." She walked into the room. "What are you thinking about?" "Nothing." Irene smiled. "You've never been good at lying to me." She sat beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Solomon looked at her. "Irene." "Yes." "Do you still love me?" Her smile slowly disappeared. She looked at him. "Why are you asking?" "Just answer me." Irene looked away. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "That is the problem." Solomon's eyes filled with tears. "You still love me." Irene stood up. "Go to sleep." "Irene." She walked toward the door. "Tomorrow is another day." She opened the door. Then she stopped. Without turning around, she said, "Don't make me regret keeping you alive." The door closed. Solomon remained frozen. He stared at the door. Then his eyes moved toward his phone. A new message had appeared. He picked it up. There was no name, only a number. The message contained one sentence. "If you really want to escape Irene, meet me tomorrow." Solomon stared at the screen. His heart began beating faster. Then another message arrived. "And don't let Irene know." Solomon slowly stood up. For the first time in months, he saw a possible way out. But he didn't know who had sent the message. And he didn't know one terrifying thing. Irene was standing on the other side of his door. If this story touched you, drop a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you want part 2, just type part 2 below. Subscribe and stay with us. More stories are coming.